Lie in the hospital bed, my vision blurring as the anesthesia they finally administered begins to take effect. But it's too late now, far too late, because while my parents, Vincent and Margaret Chen of the prestigious Chen Foundation family, were attending my adopted sister Sophia's groundbreaking contemporary installation at the Metropolitan Museum's Emerging Artists Showcase, my appendix had ruptured and the infection spread through my entire abdomen. And even now, as the surgical team rushes around me with that controlled panic I've seen too many times in medical dramas, I can hear my mother's voice through the phone speaker that my trembling hand dropped beside my pillow, her tone irritated and dismissive as she says, "Lily, darling, you're being dramatic again. Sophia's opening is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and your little stomach ache can wait until tomorrow." The irony burns worse than the sepsis coursing through my bloodstream. Because this morning, when I called them from my part-time gallery job, doubled over in pain so severe I could barely speak, my father's first response wasn't concern for my well-being, but annoyance that I might somehow overshadow Sophia's big moment. And as the heart monitor beside my bed begins that ominous, irregular beeping that signals my body's final surrender, I remember with crystal clarity every single time they chose her over me. Every birthday party moved to accommodate her schedule, every family vacation planned around her art camp sessions, every medical appointment postponed because supporting her fragile emotional state took precedence over my physical health. "Your sister needs us tonight," my mother had said, with that particular brand of guilt-laden manipulation she's perfected over the years, as if Sophia's anxiety about her mediocre installation being poorly received somehow outweighed the fact that my appendix was literally exploding inside my body. And when I tried to explain through gritted teeth that the emergency room doctor had used words like immediate surgery and life-threatening, she sighed that familiar sigh of someone whose patience is being tested by an unreasonable child and said, "We'll come by tomorrow morning after the celebration dinner, assuming you're not just being your usual attention-seeking self." The pattern of neglect stretches back through 20 years of my life like a roadmap of emotional abandonment. And as the anesthesia finally pulls me under, I remember when I was 7 years old, sitting in my grandmother's art studio in the Chen family estate in the Hamptons, my small hands already steady enough to blend oil paints with the confidence of someone 3 times my age, and how my grandmother Elena Chen, the family matriarch and renowned art critic, would watch me work with tears in her eyes, whispering, "Lily has the gift, the real gift that can't be taught or bought." But she died when I was 12, just 2 years before Sophia joined our family, and everything changed forever. Sophia arrived when I was 14, a frightened 8-year-old whose parents had died in a car accident, and my parents' guilt over her trauma led to a complete reorganization of our family dynamics where everything revolved around not triggering her delicate emotional state, which meant my high school art competitions became too stressful for her to attend. My acceptance letter to Rhode Island School of Design was celebrated quietly so as not to make her feel inadequate. And my first gallery showing at 19 was dismissed as participation trophy nonsense, while her community college pottery class projects were displayed prominently throughout our home like precious artifacts. The Chen family art collection, worth millions of dollars and spanning 4 generations of discriminating taste, covered every wall of our Fifth Avenue townhouse except for the walls in my bedroom, where my award-winning paintings stayed rolled up in a corner because they didn't match the family's contemporary aesthetic vision, which was apparently code for anything that might remind people that our biological daughter has more talent in her little finger than our adopted daughter has in her entire body. And when prestigious collectors or museum curators visited our home, my parents would guide them carefully away from any mention of my work, redirecting conversations toward Sophia's latest experimental multimedia exploration that looked suspiciously like the kind of thing first-year art students create when they're still learning to hold a paintbrush properly. The trust fund my grandmother had established specifically to support my artistic development somehow became a general family arts fund that primarily benefited Sophia's expensive private instructors and study abroad programs, while I worked part-time jobs throughout college to afford basic art supplies. And when I tried to access my inheritance for a small studio space after graduation, my parents explained with barely concealed irritation that the money was better invested in serious artistic endeavors that would bring honor to the Chen family name, which apparently meant funding Sophia's mediocre installations rather than supporting the daughter who had been winning art competitions since elementary school. But even as my heart stops beating and the machines around me begin their final electronic wails, what hurts most isn't the physical pain or even the years of emotional neglect. It's the knowledge that Daniel Westbrook, the only person who ever truly believed in my artistic vision, is probably rushing to this hospital right now after hearing from my coworker, Sarah, that I collapsed at the gallery. And he'll arrive to find that I've died alone while my family posed for photographs at yet another celebration of Sophia's unremarkable mediocrity, proving once and for all that some people spend their entire lives surrounded by family but die completely unloved. The memories flow through my dying consciousness like scenes from someone else's life, each one a small betrayal that built into the mountain of neglect that ultimately killed me. And I remember the exact moment when everything changed forever. When Sophia first arrived at our house, clutching a small suitcase and looking so lost and vulnerable that my parents' hearts broke, with the kind of protective love they had never quite managed to feel for their own biological daughter. And within 6 months, she had transformed from a grateful refugee into the center of our universe while I slowly faded into the background like a painting left too long in direct sunlight. My first major art award came just 3 weeks after Sophia moved in with us, a regional high school competition where my oil painting of the morning light streaming through our library windows had beaten entries from students 3 years older than me. And when I ran home with the trophy and the $500 prize check, breathless with excitement and desperate to share my victory with my family, I found them in the living room having what my mother called a serious discussion about Sophia's emotional needs. And when I tried to interrupt with my news, my father held up one finger in that universal gesture for wait your turn and continued explaining to my new sister why it was important for her to feel safe and valued in her new home. I stood in the doorway for 20 minutes, my trophy growing heavy in my arms and my excitement slowly curdling into something bitter and small, while they discussed therapy appointments and special tutoring and all the ways they could help Sophia adjust to her new life. And when I finally gave up and went to my room, nobody noticed I had left. And the next morning, when I tried again to share my achievement, my mother praised me with the kind of distracted enthusiasm usually reserved for children who have successfully tied their shoes, while simultaneously planning Sophia's enrollment in expensive art classes that would help her process her trauma through creative expression. The pattern established itself with ruthless efficiency. My successes became background noise while Sophia's struggles commanded center stage. My achievements were minimized as expected from someone with my advantages, while her modest improvements were celebrated as miraculous breakthroughs. And slowly but surely, I learned that the only way to get attention in my own family was to need something, to be broken or vulnerable or dramatic enough to compete with Sophia's monopoly on emotional crisis. But every time I tried to express any form of distress or disappointment, I was reminded that my problems were first world problems compared to what Sophia had endured. When I was accepted to Rhode Island School of Design with a full academic scholarship based entirely on my portfolio, my parents attended the acceptance dinner with the kind of polite enthusiasm they might show for a neighbor's child's graduation, while simultaneously planning Sophia's gap year in Paris, where she would find herself artistically at a cost that exceeded my entire 4 years of education. And when I tried to point out the irony of sending someone with minimal artistic talent to study in the art capital of the world while their genuinely gifted daughter worked restaurant jobs to afford paint, my mother accused me of being jealous and small-minded, reminding me that family means supporting each other's dreams, not competing for resources. College became my refuge, 4 years where my professors recognized my talent without needing to balance it against someone else's emotional needs, where my paintings were judged on their merit rather than their potential impact on family dynamics, and where I slowly began to understand that the rest of the world didn't see my art as a threat to someone else's fragile self-esteem. But during every holiday visit home, I watched Sophia's influence grow stronger while my connection to my family grew weaker, until I felt like a guest in my own childhood home, tolerated but not welcomed, acknowledged but not celebrated. My first gallery showing happened during my senior year at RISD, a small but prestigious space in Providence that specialized in emerging artists, and when the curator selected 3 of my paintings for a group exhibition, I called my parents with the kind of breathless excitement I hadn't felt since that long-ago art competition. But their response was immediate concern about whether the timing would conflict with Sophia's community college art fair, where she would be displaying her ceramic bowls alongside dozens of other amateur crafters. And when I explained that this was a real gallery with actual collectors and art critics, my father asked if I really thought it was appropriate to show off when Sophia was still struggling to find her artistic voice. The opening reception was held on a Thursday evening in November, the gallery walls painted stark white to showcase the dozen paintings by 6 different artists, and I wore my one good black dress and tried to pretend that the empty space where my family should have been standing didn't matter. But when Daniel Westbrook appeared beside me with a genuine smile and said, "Your work is extraordinary. You should be incredibly proud," I realized that I had been starving for that kind of simple, uncomplicated support for years without even knowing it. Daniel had grown up 3 blocks away from our townhouse, the son of old money industrialists who approached wealth with the kind of understated confidence that comes from never having to prove anything to anyone. And while our families moved in the same social circles, he had always been more interested in books and art than the kind of networking events that consumed my parents' social calendar. And that night, at my first gallery showing, he bought 2 of my paintings, not because he felt obligated or sorry for me, but because he genuinely loved the way I captured light and shadow in ways that made ordinary scenes feel transcendent. "I've been watching your work develop for years," he told me as we stood in front of my largest painting, a landscape of the Hamptons estate where I had learned to paint in my grandmother's studio. And when I asked how he had seen my work since my family never displayed it, he smiled with something that might have been sadness and said, "I make it a point to attend every exhibition by promising young artists from our neighborhood. And you've been the most promising of all of them for quite some time." And in that moment, I realized that while my own family had been ignoring my artistic development, someone else had been quietly paying attention and believing in my potential. But even Daniel's support couldn't fill the void left by my parents' indifference. And when I graduated summa cum laude with a BFA and immediate interest from 3 different galleries, my family's response was to throw a party for Sophia's associate's degree in general studies with an art minor, complete with catered dinner and congratulatory speeches about her remarkable progress and inspiring resilience, while my achievement was mentioned briefly during the dessert course as something we're all very proud of course. The years after college blurred together in a haze of part-time gallery jobs and weekend art fairs, small exhibitions in coffee shops and community centers, while I watched Sophia's career launch with the kind of fanfare and financial support that I had never received. Her first solo show at a trendy Soho gallery that my parents rented for a week, at a cost that could have funded my art supplies for 3 years, and when the reviews were lukewarm at best, calling her installations derivative and emotionally manipulative, my parents blamed the critics for being too sophisticated to appreciate her raw authenticity, while simultaneously questioning whether my more technical approach to painting might be too academic to have real commercial appeal. And now, as my consciousness fades and the hospital room grows dim around me, I realize that I spent 26 years of my life trying to earn love from people who had already given it to someone else, chasing approval from critics who could never see past their own guilt and favoritism, and dying alone in a sterile room while they celebrate mediocrity with champagne and small talk. But at least I know that somewhere in this city, Daniel Westbrook is probably holding one of my paintings and remembering the woman who created it, which is more recognition than my own family ever gave me while I was alive to appreciate it. I wake up this morning, my final morning, though I don't know it yet, with that sharp pain in my lower right side that I've been ignoring for 3 days because Sophia's Metropolitan Museum installation opening is tonight, and I already know, that any mention of discomfort will be dismissed as attention-seeking behavior designed to steal focus from her career-defining moment. And as I struggle to get out of bed, that stabbing sensation growing worse with each movement, I can hear my parents downstairs in the breakfast room discussing catering arrangements and guest lists, their voices bright with excitement I haven't heard directed toward anything involving me in years. The pain pulses through my abdomen with increasing intensity, but I force myself to shower and dress for my shift at the Morrison Gallery, where I spend my days helping wealthy collectors choose art, while my own paintings sit in my studio apartment, unseen and unappreciated except by Daniel, who stops by every few weeks to quietly purchase whatever I've completed and tell me about exhibition opportunities that my parents dismiss as not prestigious enough for the Chen family name, as if the Chen name has ever been associated with my artistic success, rather than their systematic suppression of it. During breakfast, which I managed to choke down despite the growing nausea, my mother flits around the kitchen like an excited bird, checking her phone every few minutes for updates from the museum staff and the catering company, while my father reads emails from business associates who will be attending tonight's opening. And when I mention casually that I might not feel well enough to attend the reception, hoping they might show even a fraction of concern for my obvious distress, my mother looks up from her phone with barely concealed irritation and says, "Lily, darling, you know how important this evening is for Sophia. Surely you can manage to put on a smile and be supportive for a few hours." The morning drags by in a haze of increasing pain, and by the time I arrive at the gallery, my coworker Sarah takes one look at my pale face and sweating forehead and immediately insists that I should go home, but I explain through gritted teeth that tonight is Sophia's big opening, and my family needs me to be present and functional, which sounds ridiculous even as I say it. Because when have they ever needed me for anything except as a well dressed background figure who can be trusted not to overshadow the real star of the show? And Sarah shakes her head with the kind of exasperated affection that comes from watching someone make the same mistake repeatedly and says, "Lily, you look like you're about to collapse. Your family will understand if you're sick." But I know they won't understand because understanding would require them to prioritize my well being over Sophia's emotional needs. And that calculation was settled years ago, when they decided that keeping their adopted daughter happy was more important than nurturing their biological daughter's extraordinary talent. So I spend the morning hunched over the gallery desk, trying to appear normal, while pain radiates through my entire torso. And when a collector asks about the new Basquiat acquisition, I have to excuse myself to vomit in the gallery bathroom, my body finally rebelling against my stubborn determination to fulfill my family obligations, even as they slowly kill me. By noon, the pain has become so severe that I can barely stand upright, and when I try to call my parents to explain that something is seriously wrong and I need medical attention, my mother's response is immediate panic about the timing, her voice rising with the kind of hysteria she usually reserves for genuine emergencies. Except this time, the emergency isn't my collapsing health, but the possibility that my medical drama might somehow interfere with Sophia's artistic triumph. And she says, "Lily, please tell me you're not going to do something dramatic today of all days. Your sister is already nervous enough without worrying about family crisis stealing attention from her work." The conversation deteriorates from there, with my father joining in to remind me that they've invested months of planning and thousands of dollars in tonight's opening, that influential people from the international art world will be in attendance, that Sophia's entire future might depend on the impression she makes tonight. And when I try to interrupt their litany of concerns to explain that I think my appendix might be rupturing, my father's response is to suggest that I take some ibuprofen and rest until the reception, as if appendicitis is the kind of minor inconvenience that can be managed with over the counter medication and a positive attitude. "We'll all laugh about this tomorrow," my mother says with forced cheerfulness, already mentally preparing the story she'll tell about her daughter's poorly timed hypochondria. And when I hang up the phone, my hands shaking with pain and fury, and the desperate realization that I am completely alone in this crisis, Sarah immediately calls 911 against my weak protests. And within 20 minutes, I'm in an ambulance heading to Mount Sinai Hospital while my parents continue their party preparations, completely unaware that their daughter is experiencing the medical emergency they dismissed as attention-seeking theatrics. The emergency room moves with efficient urgency once the doctors understand my symptoms. Blood tests and CT scans confirming what I already knew in my bones, that my appendix has indeed ruptured and the infection is spreading through my abdominal cavity with the kind of speed that makes medical professionals speak in clipped, serious tones. And when they explain that I need immediate surgery but require family consent for the procedure, I give them my parents' phone number with a sinking feeling that I know exactly how this conversation will go. The phone call happens exactly as I predicted, my mother's voice flowing through the hospital phone with that patronizing tone she's perfected over the years, while in the background, I can hear Sophia's nervous laughter and my father discussing wine selections with the catering manager. And when I try to explain that the pain is excruciating and the doctors are prepping for emergency surgery, my mother sighs that familiar sigh of someone whose patience is being tested by an unreasonable child and says, "Lily, sweetheart, we've invested too much in this evening to abandon it for what the doctors themselves said might just be anxiety. We'll be there first thing tomorrow morning to sort everything out." Please, I whisper into the phone, my voice barely audible over the sounds of medical equipment and distant conversations. Please come now. I'm scared and I need you here. But even as I say the words, I know they're wasted breath because nothing I could say would convince my parents to choose my medical emergency over Sophia's artistic debut. And when my mother responds with, "Don't be dramatic, darling. Appendicitis is a very routine procedure and you'll be fine. We'll bring you flowers tomorrow and hear all about your little adventure." I finally understand with absolute clarity that I am going to die tonight, alone in this hospital bed while my family poses for photographs in front of my sister's mediocre installation. The surgery is delayed for almost 3 hours, while the hospital administrators try to navigate the bureaucratic requirements of operating on an adult whose family refuses to come sign consent forms. And during those 3 hours, my appendix completes its rupture and the infection spreads through my bloodstream with the methodical efficiency of poison, my body temperature spiking and my blood pressure dropping while I drift in and out of consciousness, dreaming of my grandmother's art studio and the paintings I'll never finish and the life I might have lived if I had been born into a family that valued talent over manipulation, authenticity over emotional theater. When Daniel finally arrives, summoned by Sarah, who couldn't bear to let me face this alone, I'm already past the point where surgery might save me. The sepsis too advanced and my organs too damaged by hours of delay, and as he takes my hand and tells me that he's always believed in my art, that my paintings are the most beautiful things he's ever seen, that I matter and my work matters, and the world is dimmer without my voice in it, I realize that dying with love is better than living without it, even if that love came too late to save me. My last conscious thought is the bitter irony that tonight, while my parents celebrate Sophia's forgettable installation with champagne and congratulations, I will finally be free from their crushing indifference. My death perhaps the only thing I've ever done that they won't be able to minimize, dismiss, or overshadow with someone else's needs. And as the machines around me begin their final electronic lament, I close my eyes and let go of everything I thought I wanted, falling into darkness with the strange peace of someone who has finally stopped trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it. Then I opened my eyes and realized I had been reborn, not to some distant past, but to this exact morning 3 months ago, the morning of March 15th, when I was supposed to meet with Daniel Westbrook about his proposal to privately fund my first solo exhibition. And I know this date precisely because I remember staring at my phone screen showing 7:23 a.m., while that familiar sharp pain began in my lower abdomen. But this time, this impossible second time, I understand exactly what that pain means and exactly how this day will unfold if I allow it to follow the same catastrophic path. The recognition hits me like ice water in my veins. Crystal clear memories of my death flooding back as I sit up in my small studio apartment bed, the morning light streaming through the same unwashed windows, the same clothes draped over the same chair, the same stack of unpaid bills on the same cluttered desk. But everything is different now because I know what happens next. I know that in exactly 8 hours, my appendix will rupture completely. In 12 hours, my parents will choose Sophia's opening over my surgery, and in 18 hours, I will die alone in a hospital room while they pose for photographs celebrating mediocrity. But this time, this blessed, impossible second chance, I reach for my phone with steady hands and dial 911 before the pain can worsen. My voice clear and firm as I explain to the dispatcher that I'm experiencing symptoms of acute appendicitis and need immediate medical attention. And when they ask if I can get to the hospital myself, I say no without hesitation, without the guilt and self-doubt that killed me the first time, because I finally understand that my life is worth more than my family's convenience, my health more important than their social calendar. The paramedics arrive within 12 minutes, professional and efficient as they confirm my self-diagnosis and prepare me for transport. And when they ask about emergency contacts, I give them Daniel's number instead of my parents. Because why should I waste my second chance on people who have already proven they will choose someone else's art opening over my life? And as the ambulance speeds through the familiar streets of Manhattan, I feel something I haven't experienced in years. The absolute certainty that I am making the right choice for myself instead of the convenient choice for everyone else. At the hospital, everything proceeds exactly as it should when family obligations don't interfere with medical emergencies. The CT scan quickly confirming acute appendicitis, the surgery scheduled immediately, the skilled surgical team treating my condition as the serious medical emergency it actually is, rather than the attention seeking drama my parents will undoubtedly assume it to be. And when Daniel arrives breathless and worried after receiving my call, his face pale with genuine concern for my well being, I realize that I have spent 26 years of my life accepting scraps of attention from people who should have loved me unconditionally while ignoring the man who actually did. The doctors say you caught it just in time, Daniel tells me as I recover from the anesthesia, his hand warm and steady in mine. And when I look into his kind, intelligent eyes, I see reflected back the woman I might have been all along if I had been brave enough to choose myself first, if I had been strong enough to walk away from people who demanded my sacrifice but offered nothing in return. And I realized that my death wasn't just the end of my old life, but the beginning of something infinitely better. The text messages from my family start arriving around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, just as the nursing staff is explaining my post-operative care instructions. My mother's first message reading, "Darling, I hope you're feeling better and ready for tonight's festivities. Sophia is so nervous and needs our support." Followed by my father's practical reminder about the dress code for the museum reception, and reading their words now, with the clarity that comes from having died for their indifference, I feel nothing but a cold, clean anger that burns away the last traces of my desperate need for their approval. I respond to their messages with surgical precision, explaining that I have had emergency surgery for a life-threatening condition and will be recovering in the hospital for several days, and their replies come back with predictable patterns of irritation disguised as concern. My mother asking if I really couldn't have scheduled this for next week when it wouldn't interfere with Sophia's big night. My father suggesting that I must be exaggerating the severity, since appendectomies are routine procedures, and Sophia herself sending a message that manages to make my medical emergency about her emotional needs, saying, "I can't believe you would do this today when you know how important tonight is for my career." But their attempts at guilt and manipulation roll off me like water off glass, because I have already seen where their priorities lead. I have already experienced the ultimate consequence of putting their needs before my own well-being. And as I delete their messages without responding, I feel the liberation that comes from finally understanding that family obligations are meaningless when they only flow in one direction. That love without reciprocation is just another form of self-destruction. When Daniel returns the next morning with coffee and croissants from the French bakery near his gallery, his presence filling my sterile hospital room with warmth and possibility, I tell him about my decision to accept his exhibition proposal, to partner with his gallery instead of waiting for my family's approval or support. And the smile that spreads across his face is like sunrise after the longest night of my life, full of joy and relief, and the quiet confidence of someone who has been waiting patiently for me to realize my own worth. "I've been hoping you would say yes for months," he admits as we sit together in the morning light, my IV drip providing a steady rhythm to our conversation. And when he explains his vision for my solo exhibition, the careful curation and thoughtful presentation that would showcase my paintings as the serious artistic achievements they are, rather than the hobby my family pretends they represent, I realize that I have been so focused on earning love from people who couldn't give it, that I missed the love that was freely offered by someone who actually understood my value. The next 2 weeks pass in a blur of recovery and planning, my small apartment becoming a workspace where Daniel and I sort through years of my paintings, selecting pieces for the exhibition, while he tells me stories about the collectors and critics who have been asking about my work, people in the art world who remember my paintings from group shows years ago, and have been wondering why they haven't seen more from the promising young artist with the extraordinary technical skill and emotional depth. "You've been hiding your light under a bushel," Daniel says as we examine a landscape I painted during my darkest period, the brushstrokes revealing depths of feeling that I had been afraid to show my family because raw emotion made them uncomfortable. And when he explains how this particular piece would anchor the exhibition, drawing viewers into the emotional journey of the entire collection, I realize that artistic success isn't about family connections or social climbing. It's about finding people who understand what you're trying to say and helping them hear it clearly. My parents attempt several interventions during my recovery, appearing at my apartment with flowers and concerned expressions, trying to rebuild bridges that I no longer have any interest in crossing. And when they discover that I've partnered with Daniel's gallery for a solo exhibition, their response reveals everything I need to know about their priorities. my mother immediately worrying about how my independent success might affect Sophia's confidence, my father questioning whether it's wise to move forward without the family's guidance and connections. We just want what's best for you, my mother says with the kind of manipulative sweetness that once made me doubt my own perceptions. But now I can see through her performance, to the calculation underneath, the careful assessment of how my choices might impact their preferred narrative. And when I tell them clearly that I will be moving forward with my career independently, their masks slip just enough to reveal the irritation and control issues that have been driving their behavior all along. The final break comes when they suggest that perhaps my exhibition should be postponed until after Sophia's next installation, so that there won't be any unfortunate comparisons between their artistic endeavors. And in that moment, I understand that they will never see me as anything but a threat to their adopted daughter's fragile ego. Never value my talent except as it serves their emotional manipulation. And I tell them, with the calm certainty of someone who has already died for their indifference, that I will no longer be available for family events, holidays, or obligations that require me to minimize my own achievements for someone else's comfort. We gave you everything, my father says with the wounded righteousness of someone who genuinely believes that expensive schools and social connections constitute love. But I look at him with the clarity that comes from having experienced both death and rebirth. And I respond, "You gave me everything except what I actually needed." And as I close the door behind them, I feel the final weight of their expectations lifting from my shoulders, leaving me free to discover who I might become when I stop trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it. 2 weeks after my surgery, when I'm finally strong enough to walk through Daniel's private gallery space in his family's converted mansion on the Upper East Side, I see my future clearly for the first time. White walls that would showcase my work properly, natural lighting that would make my oil paintings glow like they're meant to, and most importantly, a partner who understands that art isn't about social climbing or family obligations, but about creating something meaningful that speaks to people's souls. And as Daniel explains his vision for my solo exhibition, I realize that in my past life, I was so desperate for my family's approval that I never considered I could succeed without them. The gallery space is everything I had dreamed of, but never dared to ask for. 3 interconnected rooms with soaring ceilings and carefully controlled lighting, the kind of serious artistic venue where collectors come to discover the next important voice rather than to make social connections or fulfill family obligations. And when Daniel shows me the works of other artists he's represented, all of them now showing in major museums and commanding serious prices at auction, I understand that he isn't offering me charity or family connections, but genuine professional partnership based on the merit of my work. "I've been following your development for years," Daniel tells me as we stand in the main exhibition room, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who has built his reputation on recognizing authentic talent before anyone else notices it. And when he explains how he's been quietly purchasing my paintings through intermediaries at group shows and art fairs, not because he felt sorry for me, but because he genuinely believed they were undervalued masterpieces, I feel the validation I had been seeking from my family finally coming from someone whose opinion actually matters in the art world. The financial independence comes gradually but inevitably, as I realize that accepting Daniel's partnership means severing the last connections to my family's money and influence, walking away from the trust fund that was supposed to support my artistic development, but had been restructured over the years to primarily benefit Sophia's expensive mediocrity. And for the first time in my adult life, I feel the terrifying exhilaration of supporting myself through my actual talents, rather than my parents' guilt-motivated generosity. I move out of my parents' guest house into a small but light-filled apartment near Daniel's gallery. The space barely large enough for my easel and canvases, but mine in a way that no family property ever was. And when my parents respond to my change of address with hurt feelings and accusations of ingratitude, I realize that their conception of family has always been based on control rather than love, obligation rather than genuine affection. And walking away from their financial support feels like emerging from underwater after holding my breath for 26 years. The art world notices my partnership with Daniel's gallery immediately because his reputation for discovering significant emerging artists carries weight with serious collectors and museum curators, and within a month of announcing my upcoming solo exhibition, I receive inquiries from critics who had dismissed my work when it appeared in community centers and coffee shops, but now want to schedule studio visits and interviews, proving that artistic merit is often indistinguishable from institutional validation in the eyes of people who matter. But the most satisfying change is watching Sophia's confident facade begin to crack as my independent success becomes impossible to ignore. Her assumption that she would always be the family's artistic star, challenged by my refusal to continue playing the supporting role in her mediocre career. And when she calls me crying about feeling abandoned and betrayed by my decision to pursue my own opportunities, I feel the cold satisfaction of someone who has finally stopped enabling another person's emotional manipulation. "I can't believe you would be so selfish," Sophia says through tears that I now recognize as calculated rather than genuine, her voice carrying the familiar note of victim positioning that had controlled our family dynamics for over a decade. But instead of rushing to comfort her and minimize my own achievements, I respond with the clarity that comes from having died for her emotional needs, telling her that my success doesn't diminish her opportunities and that healthy siblings celebrate each other's achievements rather than demanding sacrifice for their own comfort. The conversation ends with Sophia hanging up on me after I refuse to postpone my exhibition until after her next installation. And when my parents call later to lecture me about family loyalty and sisterly duty, I find myself laughing at the absurdity of being criticized for selfishness by people who spent years prioritizing one daughter's feelings over the other daughter's life. And I tell them with perfect calm that Sophia will have to learn to manage her insecurities without using me as an emotional support system. The gallery preparations consume my days with the kind of productive exhaustion I had never experienced while trying to please my family. Every decision focused on presenting my work in the most honest and compelling way, rather than minimizing its impact to avoid making someone else feel inadequate. And as Daniel and I plan the opening reception, selecting wines and designing invitations and writing catalog copy that treats my paintings as serious artistic achievements, I realize that professional respect feels completely different from family obligation, cleaner and more energizing and ultimately more sustainable. My parents make several attempts to reconcile during the weeks leading up to my exhibition, their approaches ranging from guilty manipulation to outright bribery, offering to feature my work in Chen Foundation exhibitions if I'll agree to coordinate my career with Sophia's schedule. But each conversation only reinforces my understanding that they see my art as a family asset to be managed rather than individual expression to be celebrated. And I decline their offers with the polite firmness of someone who has learned the difference between love and control. The final break comes when my mother suggests that perhaps my exhibition catalog should include an essay about the Chen family's commitment to nurturing young artists, effectively positioning my solo debut as an extension of their philanthropic activities. And when I explain that my partnership with Daniel's gallery represents my independence from family influence rather than an extension of it, her response reveals the calculation that has been driving their behavior all along. Her immediate concern being how my independence might be perceived by their social circle rather than how it might benefit my artistic development. "People will think we're not supporting you," she says with the kind of social anxiety that has always trumped genuine parental concern in their decision-making. And I realize that their attempts at reconciliation have nothing to do with repairing our relationship and everything to do with maintaining their image as supportive arts patrons. And I tell her clearly that their reputation is their responsibility while my career is mine, and that I will no longer be available to serve as a prop in their performance of family unity. 6 months after my rebirth, on a crisp October evening when the leaves in Central Park mirror the warm tones of my latest landscape series, Daniel and I stand in his gallery watching a crowd of genuine art enthusiasts examine my paintings with the kind of intense focus I never saw at Sophia's heavily catered social events. And when Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, the notoriously difficult collector who makes or breaks emerging artists' careers, spends 20 minutes studying my piece Morning Light on the Hudson before quietly purchasing it for 6 figures, I feel a satisfaction that has nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with artistic validation. The opening reception exceeds every expectation I had harbored during those years of showing my work in community centers and coffee shops. The gallery filled with people who came specifically to see my paintings rather than to fulfill social obligations or support family connections. And as I watch collectors and critics move through the space with the kind of serious attention that my work had never received from my own family, I understand that artistic success isn't about who you know, but about what you create, and whether it speaks to something true in the people who encounter it. Your technique is extraordinary, says James Morrison, the art critic from Art News, whose reviews can launch or destroy emerging careers. And when he explains how my use of light reminds him of the Hudson River schoolmasters, but with a contemporary emotional depth that feels entirely fresh, I realized that the years I spent perfecting my craft, while my family dismissed it as hobby, were actually building toward this moment of recognition from people who understand the difference between genuine talent and social climbing. The sales begin immediately, collectors responding to my work with the kind of enthusiasm that comes from discovering something authentic in a world full of manufactured trends. And by the end of the evening, we've sold 12 of the 15 paintings in the exhibition, including several to museums that want to add my work to their permanent collections, which means that my art will be preserved and displayed for future generations to study and appreciate. Something that Sophia's installations, designed for social media impact rather than lasting value, will never achieve. But the most meaningful moment comes when Daniel introduces me to Harrison Chen, my grandmother's old friend and contemporary, who tells me with tears in his eyes that my paintings remind him of the work Elena used to create in her private studio, the pieces she never showed publicly because she was ahead of her time. And when he says, she would be so proud to see you carrying on her artistic legacy, I feel a connection to my grandmother that my parents had tried to sever when they dismissed her influence as old-fashioned and irrelevant to contemporary artistic practice. The reviews begin appearing within days, critics comparing my work to established masters while acknowledging my unique contemporary voice. And when Art in America features my exhibition on their cover with the headline Emerging Talent, the Authentic Voice of Lily Chen, I realize that my artistic reputation is being built on genuine merit rather than family connections, which means it will be sustainable and respected in ways that purchased recognition never could be. The international attention follows quickly, galleries in London and Paris requesting studio visits, collectors from Hong Kong and Tokyo making acquisition inquiries, and when the Venice Biennale curators include me in their emerging artist showcase for the following year. I understand that my career has reached the level of serious international recognition that most artists spend decades trying to achieve, and I've done it in less than a year by simply refusing to compromise my vision for other people's comfort. My parents' awareness of my success grows gradually through their art world connections, people at museum galas and gallery openings asking why they never mentioned their extraordinarily talented daughter. And when my father calls to congratulate me with the kind of awkward formality usually reserved for distant acquaintances, I can hear the bewilderment in his voice as he tries to understand how I achieved international recognition without their guidance or support. "We always knew you were talented," my mother says during her own stilted phone call, her voice carrying the revisionist tone of someone trying to rewrite history to cast herself in a better light. But I remember with perfect clarity every time she chose Sophia's mediocrity over my achievements, every opportunity she helped me miss because it might make her adopted daughter feel inadequate. And I respond with polite acknowledgement that contains no warmth or invitation for further involvement in my success. Sophia's reaction to my rising profile provides the most vindication. Her increasing desperation evident in the frantic social media posts about her latest installations and the demanding phone calls where she accuses me of stealing her spotlight and using family connections to advance my career. Apparently unaware of the irony that she's criticizing me for the very tactics that launched her own modest recognition, and when she threatens to expose my success as somehow fraudulent, I realize that she has never understood the difference between genuine artistic achievement and manufactured publicity. The commissions begin arriving from private collectors and corporations, requests for custom pieces that command prices higher than anything I had imagined possible during those years of selling small paintings at weekend art fairs and when a tech billionaire pays $300,000 for a landscape of his childhood home. I understand that my financial independence is no longer dependent on family approval or support, which means I can make artistic decisions based entirely on creative integrity rather than commercial considerations or family politics. But the most satisfying development is watching the Chen Foundation struggle to maintain their reputation as discerning arts patrons, while the art world questions how they failed to recognize their own daughter's extraordinary talent. Board members beginning to wonder about the family's judgment when they consistently promoted mediocre work while ignoring genuine artistic genius. and my parents finding themselves in the embarrassing position of having to explain why they never featured my paintings in their foundation exhibitions or mentioned my achievements in their philanthropic activities. The documentary inquiries start after my work breaks auction records. Filmmakers interested in exploring the story of an artist who achieved international recognition despite being overlooked by her own family, and when I declined to participate in projects that would focus on family drama rather than artistic development, I realized that my revenge is complete not through public humiliation, but through my refusal to give my parents' neglect any more attention than it deserves, which is to say, none at all. 1 year after my rebirth, I stand in the back of Sotheby's contemporary art auction room, wearing the simple black dress that Daniel chose because he said it would let my confidence shine through. And I watch as my painting, Solitude in Blue, that I created during those dark months when my family consistently chose Sophia over me, sells for $2.3 million to an anonymous bidder. Setting a record for a living artist under 30, while 3 rows ahead of me, I can see my parents sitting rigid with shock, and Sophia's face twisted with an expression I remember well but never want to see again. The auction house buzzes with the kind of controlled excitement that comes from witnessing art history being made, dealers and collectors whispering about the extraordinary price achieved by such a young artist. And when the auctioneer's gavel comes down with finality, marking my transition from emerging talent to established master, I feel the satisfaction of someone who has proven their worth through merit rather than manipulation, talent rather than family connections. Ladies and gentlemen, a new auction record, the auctioneer announces with the kind of reverence usually reserved for deceased masters, and I watch my parents' faces cycle through disbelief, embarrassment, and what might be recognition of their own massive failure in judgment, while Sophia's expression remains frozen in the kind of fury that comes from watching someone else achieve the success she believed was rightfully hers. The bidding war had been fierce, 5 serious collectors driving the price far beyond the pre-sale estimate. And when I learned later that the winning bidder was Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, acting on behalf of the Metropolitan Museum's permanent collection, I realized that my painting will now hang in the same institution where Sophia had her forgettable installation opening, except mine will be displayed for decades, while hers was dismantled after 6 weeks to make room for more significant work. The aftermath of the auction unfolds with the kind of public drama that I had never intended but can't help appreciating. Social media exploding with discussions about the family who didn't recognize their own genius, art bloggers writing think pieces about institutional blindness and the importance of independent artistic vision, and reporters calling for interviews about my journey from overlooked family member to auction house sensation. My parents attempt damage control through their usual channels, giving quotes to society magazines about how proud they are of my success and how they always believed in my artistic potential. But their revisionist narrative is immediately contradicted by people who remember their conspicuous absence from my early exhibitions and their consistent promotion of Sophia's mediocre work. And the art world's response ranges from amusement to disgust at their transparent attempt to claim credit for achievements they had actively discouraged. Sophia's public meltdown happens during the after-party at the Carlisle Hotel, where she corners a reporter from Art Forum and launches into a tearful rant about how I stole her opportunities and manipulated family connections to achieve success, apparently forgetting that dozens of people can hear her accusations and that most of them know the actual history of our family dynamics. And when someone records her breakdown and posts it online, she becomes an unfortunate cautionary tale about artistic entitlement rather than the victim she's trying to portray. She's always been jealous of my talent, Sophia sobs to anyone who will listen, her makeup running and her voice reaching that particular pitch that signals complete loss of emotional control. But the art world veterans who witness her performance recognize it as the desperate flailing of someone who never developed genuine artistic skill and is watching their manufactured career crumble in real time. And by the next morning, her humiliation has become the kind of industry gossip that follows artists throughout their careers. The media coverage focuses inevitably on the family angle. Journalists fascinated by the story of parents who were so committed to supporting their adopted daughter's artistic dreams that they failed to recognize their biological daughter's extraordinary talent. And while I decline most interview requests, preferring to let my work speak for itself, the narrative writes itself through public records and eyewitness accounts of family events where my achievements were minimized while Sophia's mediocrity was celebrated. It's like discovering that Van Gogh's family was promoting his brother's finger paintings, writes Jerry Saltz in New York Magazine, his review of my auction success capturing the absurdity of my parents' choices with the kind of wit that makes their failure a permanent part of art world lore. And when I read his piece over coffee the next morning, I realized that my revenge is complete not through any action I took, but through the natural consequences of their own decisions finally catching up with them. The Chen Foundation board meeting happens 3 days after the auction, and while I'm not privy to the details, Daniel hears through Art World connections that several major donors questioned the family's artistic judgment so severely that my parents had to defend their basic competence as arts patrons, with one board member reportedly asking how they could be trusted to identify emerging talent when they had completely missed the most significant artist to emerge from their own household. But the most satisfying development is watching Sophia's career implode under the weight of increased scrutiny. Critics who had previously given her work generous reviews because of family connections now approaching her installations with the kind of serious analysis they actually deserve. And when her latest exhibition receives universally harsh reviews, calling her work derivative, emotionally manipulative, and technically primitive, I realize that authentic criticism is far more devastating than any revenge I could have planned. The final vindication comes when Marcus Sterling, the curator who had been romantically involved with Sophia and professionally invested in her success, publicly distances himself from her work in an interview where he admits that he had been overly generous in his previous assessments and that her art lacks the technical skill and emotional depth necessary for serious consideration, effectively ending both their personal and professional relationship in a single devastating statement that becomes required reading in art world circles. As news of my success spreads through the art world, the Chen Foundation faces a credibility crisis that threatens their fourth-generation reputation, because how can a family that claims expertise in identifying and nurturing artistic talent have so completely failed to recognize the extraordinary gift in their own daughter? And when major donors and board members begin questioning their judgment, my parents finally understand that their favoritism towards Sophia wasn't just cruel to me, it was professionally devastating to their own legacy. The board meeting minutes that leaked to Art News reveal the extent of their institutional embarrassment, with one longtime supporter reportedly saying, "If the Chen family can't recognize talent in their own household, how can we trust their curatorial decisions for our foundation grants?" And another board member suggesting that perhaps it's time for fresh leadership that might bring more authentic artistic vision to their philanthropic activities, which is a polite way of saying that my parents' credibility as arts patrons has been permanently damaged by their own choices. Sophia's complete downfall unfolds with the kind of poetic justice that feels almost too perfect to be real. Her gallery canceling her upcoming solo exhibition due to poor advance sales and critical skepticism, her application to graduate school rejected by 3 different programs, and her social circle gradually abandoning her as her reputation shifts from promising emerging artist to cautionary tale about artistic privilege, leaving her increasingly isolated and defensive about achievements that had always been more about family connections than genuine talent. The financial impact on my parents becomes apparent when several major collectors quietly remove their names from Chen Foundation acquisition committees, their confidence in the family's artistic judgment so thoroughly shaken that they prefer to make direct donations to museums, rather than trust the Chens to allocate their philanthropic contributions wisely. And when the foundation's annual gala sees a significant drop in attendance and donations, my parents finally begin to understand that professional reputation, once damaged, is almost impossible to rebuild. But the most satisfying consequence is watching them attempt to rebuild their relationship with me through increasingly desperate overtures, flower deliveries and lunch invitations, and carefully worded apologies that never quite acknowledge the full extent of their favoritism. And when they offer to feature my work in the Chen Foundation's next major exhibition, positioning it as a generous opportunity rather than the obvious attempt at damage control it actually represents, I decline with the polite firmness of someone who no longer needs their approval or support. "We realize we may have made some mistakes," my mother says during one of her periodic phone calls, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone trying to negotiate a peace treaty without admitting fault. But when she immediately follows this non-apology with suggestions about how I might help Sophia through this difficult period by sharing some of my opportunities or providing emotional support, I understand that even their attempts at reconciliation are designed to benefit their preferred daughter rather than repair our relationship. My father's approach is more pragmatic, offering to invest in Daniel's gallery or purchase several of my paintings for the family collection, apparently believing that money can solve the problems that money helped create. But when I explain that I'm no longer interested in family financial entanglements or obligations, his confusion is so complete that I realize he has never understood that love can't be purchased or that relationships require genuine emotional investment rather than transactional generosity. The extended family's response provides additional vindication. Cousins and aunts who had always questioned my parents' obvious favoritism towards Sophia now feeling validated in their concerns. And when my great aunt Virginia tells me privately that she had been leaving money to Sophia in her will, but has now changed it to support my artistic career instead, I understand that my success has shifted the entire family dynamic in ways that my parents can't control or manipulate. Sophia's eventual recognition of her own mediocrity comes during a gallery visit, where she sees my work displayed with the kind of respect and attention she had always craved for her own installations. And when she calls me crying with what sounds like genuine remorse, rather than her usual emotional manipulation, apologizing for years of jealousy and competition that she now realizes were based on her own insecurities, rather than any actual injustice, I feel something approaching sympathy for the frightened child who had been so desperate for family love that she convinced herself my success threatened her security. I was so afraid they would love you more, she admits through tears that sound different from her previous dramatic performances, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who has finally stopped performing and started facing reality. And when she asks if we might be able to rebuild some kind of relationship based on honesty rather than competition, I realize that my forgiveness doesn't require her success or failure, just her willingness to acknowledge the truth about our family dynamic. The Chen Foundation's slow rehabilitation happens through humble acknowledgement of their failures, my parents eventually giving interviews where they admit to making serious errors in judgment regarding their daughters' artistic careers and express deep regret about the opportunities they failed to provide me. And while their public contrition feels calculated rather than heartfelt, their willingness to damage their own reputation for the sake of setting the record straight suggests that they may finally understand the consequences of their choices. But the most meaningful reconciliation comes with my grandmother's legacy, when my parents finally allow me to access her private studio and discover dozens of paintings she had hidden away because they were too ahead of their time for the family's conservative aesthetic preferences. And as I study her work in the space where I first learned to paint, I realize that artistic vision often requires patience and courage, qualities that my grandmother possessed and tried to pass on to me during those precious years before she died. And the final resolution happens gradually, through small gestures and careful conversations, my parents slowly learning to appreciate my success without trying to claim credit for it, Sophia finding her own path in art therapy rather than gallery exhibitions, and my own understanding that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, but simply refusing to let past hurts control future possibilities. And when we share our first family dinner in over a year, the conversation feels tentative but genuine, like the beginning of relationships based on truth rather than obligation. 2 years after my rebirth, Daniel and I stand in the private garden behind his gallery where we first discussed my exhibition, surrounded by the paintings that launched my career. And when he takes my hand and tells me that loving me has been the easiest thing he's ever done while watching my art touch people's lives has been the most inspiring, I realize that this is what happiness feels like. Not the desperate need for approval I chased in my past life, but the quiet confidence that comes from being valued for exactly who you are. The proposal happens on a Tuesday morning in April, sunlight streaming through the new leaves of the oak tree that shades the gallery's sculpture garden. And when Daniel explains that he's been carrying his grandmother's engagement ring for 6 months, waiting for the perfect moment, but finally realizing that every moment with me is perfect, I understand that true love doesn't require dramatic gestures or perfect timing, just the daily choice to see and celebrate each other's authentic selves. I want to spend my life supporting your art and watching you change the world, he says as he slides the vintage sapphire ring onto my finger, the blue stone catching the morning light like a piece of captured sky. And when I tell him that he already has changed my world by believing in my work when no one else would, by choosing me when I had forgotten how to choose myself, his smile contains all the joy and relief of someone who has been patient enough to wait for real love rather than settling for convenient affection. The wedding planning becomes an extension of our artistic partnership, every detail chosen to reflect our shared values, rather than family expectations or social obligations. And when my parents offer to host the reception at their estate, their gesture feels like genuine affection rather than attempted control. Perhaps because my success has finally convinced them that I don't need their approval to thrive, which paradoxically makes their support feel more authentic than it ever did when I was desperate for it. My professional life reaches heights that would have seemed impossible during those years of showing my work in coffee shops and community centers. My paintings now selling for $5, 10 million each at auction. Prestigious museums competing to acquire pieces for their permanent collections, and international critics comparing my work to masters whose influence shaped entire artistic movements. But the most satisfying recognition comes from other artists who tell me that my success gives them courage to pursue their own authentic vision rather than chasing commercial trends. The retrospective exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum happens 3 years after my rebirth, the same institution where Sophia had her small opening that my parents chose over my surgery. And when the curator explains that my work represents a return to classical technique combined with thoroughly contemporary emotional depth, I realize that artistic success isn't about rejecting the past, but about building on it with honesty and skill, qualities that can't be purchased or manufactured, but must be developed through years of patient practice. Standing in the museum gallery surrounded by 30 years of my artistic development, from my earliest student works to the recent paintings that command record prices, I feel the satisfaction of someone who has remained true to their vision, despite external pressure to compromise. And when visitors move through the exhibition with the kind of reverent attention usually reserved for historical masters, I understand that my grandmother's prediction about my gift has finally been validated by the only judges that matter: the centuries of artists and viewers who recognize authentic artistic achievement. The pregnancy announcement coincides with my invitation to represent the United States at the Venice Biennale, news that I share with Daniel during a quiet dinner at home, our converted warehouse space filled with canvases and the tools of my trade. And when he cries with happiness at the thought of our child growing up surrounded by art and love, and the example of parents who chose each other based on genuine compatibility rather than convenience or obligation, I realize that we're creating the kind of family I had always wanted but never known how to imagine. Our children will grow up knowing they're valued for who they are, not who we need them to be, Daniel says as we plan the nursery in the room next to my studio, his hand resting on my growing belly while we discuss how to child-proof the space without compromising its function as a working artist's sanctuary. And when I feel our baby respond to his voice with gentle movements, I understand that love can be inherited, passed down through generations, when parents choose to give freely rather than demanding payment for their affection. The relationship with my family continues to heal slowly, built on mutual respect rather than desperate need. My parents learning to appreciate my success without trying to claim credit for it. And when my mother asks if she can include one of my paintings in the Chen Foundation's permanent collection, her request feels like recognition rather than manipulation, acknowledgement of my artistic achievement rather than attempt to control my career. Sophia finds her own path in art therapy, working with trauma survivors who create healing through creative expression. And when she tells me that my success actually inspired her to find work that feels meaningful rather than merely visible, I realize that my refusal to enable her jealousy ultimately helped her discover her authentic calling, which required her to develop empathy and service rather than seeking attention and validation. But the most meaningful transformation happens in my own understanding of success. The recognition that artistic achievement isn't about revenge or validation, but about creating work that speaks to something true in human experience. And when a young artist approaches me after a gallery opening to thank me for showing her that it's possible to maintain artistic integrity while achieving commercial success, I realize that my real legacy won't be the prices my paintings command, but the example I provide for other artists who are struggling to choose between authenticity and approval. As I stand in my sun-filled studio, my hand resting on my growing belly while I add finishing touches to a painting that will debut at the Guggenheim next month, I think about my past life and feel not anger but gratitude. Because sometimes you have to die to everything you thought you wanted in order to discover what you actually need. And what I needed wasn't my family's approval or Sophia's downfall, but Daniel's unwavering support, my own artistic voice, and the courage to choose myself first, which led to everything else falling perfectly into place. The baby kicks as if responding to my thoughts, and I laugh with the pure joy of someone who has learned that love multiplies rather than divides, that artistic success shared with the right person becomes more meaningful rather than less, and that the family you choose can heal the wounds left by the family you were born into, not through rejection or resentment, but through the daily practice of seeing and celebrating each other's authentic worth. In 3 months, I will give birth to a daughter who will grow up in a home filled with art and music and books, surrounded by parents who chose each other for the right reasons and who will choose her for exactly the same reason. The simple recognition that love means celebrating someone else's light rather than demanding they dim it for your comfort. And when I imagine teaching her to paint in the same studio where I learned to value my own vision, I understand that the best revenge is indeed living well. But living well means creating beauty and meaning and love, rather than merely achieving success at someone else's expense. The afternoon light shifts across my easel, illuminating the landscape I'm painting of the garden where Daniel proposed, where we'll teach our daughter to recognize beauty in ordinary moments, where she'll learn that art isn't about competition or approval, but about paying attention to the world with enough care to capture what matters. And as I mix the perfect shade of green for the new leaves that will shade her childhood, I realize that my rebirth wasn't just about changing my own fate, but about creating a future where authentic love and artistic truth can flourish without apology or compromise. This is what happiness looks like. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of meaning. Not the approval of people who never understood me, but the deep satisfaction of work that matters and love that endures. And when Daniel comes home from the gallery with news that another museum wants to acquire my latest series, I kiss him with the gratitude of someone who finally understands that the best art, like the best love, comes from choosing to see clearly rather than being seen by others. And that sometimes the greatest gift you can give the world is simply the courage to be exactly who you were meant to be.